Let's talk about 22-year-old Mercedes Vega, an exotic dancer living in Tempe, Arizona. Mercedes Vega was a young woman, just 22 years old. She lived in Tempe, Arizona, and worked as an exotic dancer. Friends described her as friendly, hardworking, and full of dreams about her future. But in April 2023, her life took a tragic turn, and her dreams came to a sudden, horrifying end. Mercedes disappeared one night without any warning. She was last seen on security cameras walking into the parking garage at her apartment complex. It seemed like a normal night, just like any other. But this time, she never came back out. Soon after, her family and friends started to worry because Mercedes never disappeared without telling anyone. The police started investigating immediately. When they arrived at her apartment building, they found something disturbing in the parking garage: bloodstains on the ground. This was the first clue that something very bad had happened to Mercedes. Not far from her home, the police found Mercedes' car. It was abandoned, left alone as if someone had parked it quickly and fled. When they looked inside, investigators found more blood in Mercedes' purse. This meant something violent likely happened inside her car, and it scared the police even more. Detectives carefully checked for fingerprints, hoping to find clues about who had hurt Mercedes. They were able to collect fingerprints inside the car, especially from a plastic grocery bag left behind. These prints led them straight to two suspects, Spencer Hayes and Jared Gray. These men had traveled from Tennessee, far from Arizona, just before Mercedes vanished. As detectives put the pieces together, they realized this wasn't just a random crime. It seemed like a planned and cruel attack. Mercedes had been kidnapped, and what happened to her next was beyond terrible. The medical examiners told a story of unbelievable cruelty. Mercedes had bleach poured down her throat, a painful and terrifying act. She had also been shot in the arm and hit hard on the head, indicating she had been violently attacked. But sadly, her suffering didn't stop there. The worst part was where she was found. Investigators discovered her body inside a car on the side of Interstate 10, about 60 miles from her home. The car had been set on fire with Mercedes still alive inside. She had died from breathing in smoke and suffering severe burns. Police said the fire was likely set to destroy evidence, but enough clues remained to lead them to suspects. But who would do something so horrible? And why? Detectives soon discovered a shocking reason. One of the suspects, Kajjo Young, had known Mercedes before. He had robbed her at gunpoint back in 2020. Mercedes bravely decided to speak up against him and was planning to testify in court. This made Kajjo Young very angry, and police believe he planned revenge. Kajjo Young, along with Spencer Hayes and Jared Gray, came up with a cruel plan to hurt Mercedes and silence her forever. They traveled across states, from Tennessee to Arizona, specifically to carry out this terrible plot. So, each step was carefully planned, making it clear to the investigators that this was no accident. It was meant to scare, hurt, and silence Mercedes permanently. Investigators knew that Mercedes had suffered terribly in her final moments. They were determined to bring justice and ensure the three men face consequences for their actions. But many questions still needed answers, such as exactly how the suspects carried out their plan and if anyone else was involved. As police kept gathering evidence, they realized this case wasn't only about Mercedes. It pointed to something bigger and darker involving these three men. The detectives continued their investigation, trying to uncover every detail and ensure that Mercedes' story was fully told, so justice could finally be served. Jesse Weber spoke with forensic death investigator from Jacksonville State University, Joseph Scott Morgan, about the investigation so far. So let's hear the interview.
Let me bring in my good friend, forensic death investigator from Jacksonville State University, Joseph Scott Morgan. Joseph, really great to see you. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks for having me, Jess.
We cover a lot of really disturbing cases. We cover a lot of disturbing deaths. When I just laid out for you what happened to her, what stands out to you?
Well, I got to tell you, just the mention of the bleach to me, it actually smacks of the Christopher Newsom and Shannon Christian case out of Knoxville, Tennessee. I don't know if you recall that several years ago, and it was the only way, the one word that you use to describe, that case from those many years ago up in Knoxville is torture. And that's completely what this sounds like. This was not a quick death. There was a lot of suffering that went on here. It was not something that was done in an instant. Even if you take into account that they had blood deposition at the scene, my thought was the blood that may have been found, say, in the parking garage was probably to get her to comply. I don't have any way of really sensing, what type of injury she would have sustained, but you would have had to have gotten her to comply in order to get into a vehicle with them. And then from there, it goes from bad to evil. It's the only way I can describe it.
Anger, too, right? I mean, it gives you progression of events too. Like, I don't know if it was.
Yeah, these things don't generally happen in a vacuum.
Yeah.
You don't. It's not like a randomized thing. And look, who's going to target a young lady like this? Let's just face it. It's not like you got a couple of big burly guys that are going at each other, and they're just hammering away at each other, punching, slashing, kicking, maybe even shooting at one another. Why is it that this one young lady would be targeted, and the end result is truly stuff that, as even a practitioner, are these little vignettes that make up your worst nightmares? All right, this is stuff that these investigators will relive in their minds 80 years from now or 60 years from now when they're sitting back reflecting on their careers. They'll say, I remember this case. This will be a benchmark case for them.
Are you surprised they're able to determine what happened to her given the environment she was in, given that she was burned? I mean, the fact that they can detect the bleach, they can detect the gunshot wound, is that abnormal to you? Does that seem, or what does that tell you?
No, it's not. First off, I would have to say that the burning that went on, though it's bad, it's not to the point where her body has disintegrated to the point where you can't appreciate trauma. Maybe in wound tracks, because they're talking about, for instance, like you've got a gunshot wound. Let me kind of break it down for you how this works. First off, fire-related deaths, those deaths that are associated with fire, are some of the most complex cases to work because you do have a lot of destruction. So the first thing you have to do is x-ray the body, once the body comes in. And in doing so, you're looking at those radiographs to see if you see like any radio-opaque bodies. And I'm talking about not a body, but like a lead core projectile that's in there. And you can actually, Jesse, and this is kind of fascinating, our listeners may really be interested in this, you can actually see a lead storm many times with wound tracks where the bullet will fragment. You can actually track it on x-ray, and you can see where it entered and maybe where it comes to an end. You can find the round if it's still in the body, or you can see where it exits. That's one of the things you're going to be looking for, because you have to, before you go through the process of an autopsy where you're actually going to open the body, you want to keep the body as pristine as possible, examine it as externally thoroughly as you can, and then internally with radiographs. There are even some offices that use CTs that have that kind of technology at their disposal. And that's what you need to do in a case like this. Another thing, when you get a body that comes in that has been burned, we see this in household fires and car fires many times, is that there will be debris that will come in with the body that's literally melted to the body or attached. Like I've found springs, screws, all kinds of things that get attached to the surface of the body through burning. And so you have to be able to delineate between, is this a bit of evidence, or is this something that came up as a result of being in this environment? The chilling part to this, Jesse, is two things other than, the torture, this kind of torture she went through, is that there's evidence that she had bleach on board, which my estimation is that it was probably poured down her throat. You may have even had bleach in her stomach, which we would take stomach contents in a case like this. And secondly, they're talking about being burned alive, all right? And that the cause of death was smoke inhalation. We draw blood in all cases, but particularly it's important in fire-related cases because we'll run a test called a carboxyhemoglobin level. And with carboxyhemoglobin level, that tells you that there's carbon monoxide that is in the body. Here's why that's important. Because as your body uptakes this product, it's actually trying to metabolize it. That's evidence of life during the fire. So the top straw is actually telling you, yes, this person was in fact alive while they were on fire.
It's unimaginable. It's unimaginable to think what she went through. It really, really is. And you asked before, well, who would have done this? Okay, well, let's talk about who allegedly did this, because we now know that evidence from inside Mercedes' abandoned car helped investigators connect multiple suspects to the crime, and 3 men are now facing charges. So one of those men is Kajjo Young. He was already facing, by the way, armed robbery charges for targeting Mercedes back in 2020. According to prosecutors, Young had apparently targeted multiple dancers at the same club, following them home, demanding money at gunpoint. And Mercedes actually picked this suspect out of a photo lineup, wrote a victim impact statement for the court. According to Mercedes' family, she planned to testify against Young, and they have long suspected that her later killing was connected to this armed robbery case. Now, it's our understanding that the Maricopa County Attorney's Office told Arizona Central that it's reviewing recommendations from the Sheriff's Office to charge Young with conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. And the sheriff told ABC 15 that Young was out of custody when Mercedes was murdered in April 2023. He had an ankle monitor on him. So last November, we told you that a 22-year-old man named Sincere Hayes had been arrested thousands of miles away in Tennessee. He was extradited to Arizona, and ABC 15 reports he was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of vehicle theft, 1 count of armed robbery, and 1 count of kidnapping involving a death. And last month, prosecutors filed court paperwork that indicates they plan to seek the death penalty against Hayes. And now we have a third man. 25-year-old Jared Gray has been linked to Mercedes' horrific murder as well. He was arrested in Georgia, and his extradition is still pending. The sheriff's office plans to recommend charges of first-degree murder, kidnapping, armed robbery, theft. Joseph, before we even get into the forensic data, and there's, substantial forensic data, multiple parties here, you have a potential motive, you have a potential ringleader. This is now starting to potentially, the pieces are starting to come together.
Yeah, they are. And, I think that 2 of these individuals were approximating each other geographically in Tennessee. What are the odds, right? And as an investigator, those are the types of things, those little data points that you're looking for when you're trying to piece all of this together. It's not just a matter of questioning somebody and getting information from them. It's actually doing your own legwork, and geography plays a huge part in this. Downrange from this, I'm really wondering where else these individuals have been associated over a period of time. All 3 of these subjects coming together where you've got some kind of confluence here. And I think that that's something that probably law enforcement and the prosecutor are looking at to try to establish this, because I think you just said that charged with conspiracy. So if they're charged with a conspiracy, I guess they're entering into some kind of criminal confederacy or whatever the case might be in order to perpetrate this crime. Right. Again, it comes back to that essential question. Why this young lady, and why to this degree?
Well, the motive, if it really was so she wouldn't testify and there was an anger built up, you can start to see what might be happening. Now, by the way, even though they're innocent until proven guilty, we're going to get into the forensic evidence. Joseph hosts this podcast. It's called Body Bags. I want everybody to check it out. It's phenomenal. As we're talking together, he breaks these kinds of issues down in such a granular way, not only easy to understand, but you can also understand why the evidence is so important, how it ties back to the suspects or the defendants, because it's this science that tells so much of the story. So I encourage everybody to check out Body Bags with Joseph. So let's talk about it here, okay? Our team is still working to get the court documents from Maricopa County, but here is what news outlets ABC 15 and Arizona Central have reported from the criminal complaint. So it turns out the Chevrolet Malibu that was spotted burning alongside I-10, that was in the parking garage, that car, where Mercedes left for the last time and reportedly exited the garage around the same time. So we're talking about this crime scene. When police found Mercedes' car that was parked near her apartment complex, they found blood, as well as the large purse that Mercedes was carrying in the surveillance video. And underneath that was a plastic grocery bag that had blood near its handles, with a second grocery bag inside it. This is according to the court filing. Investigators then find a fingerprint on the plastic, but when they put it into the nationwide fingerprint database, they didn't get any matches. And then it was a year before a possibility finally popped up, allegedly matching Sincere Hayes, who was arrested in May of 2024 in Tennessee and had his prints added to the database. Gray's fingerprint was reportedly found on the bottom of a plastic cup inside the Malibu. Joseph, over to you. What do you want to talk about first? You want to talk about what was found in her car, the blood? You want to talk about the fingerprints? There's a lot of material here to get into. Start, maybe the fingerprints is the most
Let's start with the fingerprints. And it's interesting you talk about plastic grocery bag. It takes me back all those years ago with the Madrid bombing, terrorist bombing. Madrid, Spain, and that whole case famously hinged on a fingerprint on a plastic bag at that particular time. So plastic bags tend to be non-porous. I'm not saying they're non-porous like glass, but they're certainly not like wood. But you have to be very careful with them when you're recovering these things, because the slightest movement of the bag, the inappropriate collection of it, can eradicate that print. These are very fragile. They are generated as a result of the fatty lipids that we produce in our skin that leach out onto the surface of our skin and our fingertips, which we have friction ridges here. We don't have fingerprints on our fingers. We leave fingerprints behind, right? And so when you touch that non-porous surface, you're going to leave a negative image of that print there. I think my question would be, was it a latent print that they found? You had mentioned deposition of blood. I wonder if there was a bloody print on there that goes back to an individual, because you can have both. And depending upon how it was collected, that could be very evidence-rich. And also, whose blood was it? Is it the victim's blood or is it somebody else's blood? So there's a lot to be gleaned from this bag, also the position of the bag in the vehicle. And then on top of that, you have blood evidence in the vehicle. So that this dynamic that's going on inside of there, people don't just spontaneously start bleeding, do they, Jess? Something has to happen. You have to open up an injury on a person. Popped in the mouth, popped in the nose, hit in the head, shot. You don't know what the origin of any of this stuff is. And so you have to find out what the source is of the blood, also the source of the fingerprint within her vehicle. That's going to be very important, because if it is one of these suspects that is involved in this and they've had no prior contact with her, intimate contact in her circle, how do you explain that their print is inside of her vehicle? I don't know about you, man, but my vehicle is like my little kingdom, right? It's almost like being in my home. I don't just invite anybody into my home. I don't invite just anybody into my vehicle. How did it wind up there?
And that's not the only evidence, by the way. So according to the court filings, Hayes, Young, and Gray, despite being arrested in 3 different states, they were all from Tennessee originally. And when police flew across the country to arrest Hayes back in November, they also reportedly spoke with Gray, who denied ever traveling to Arizona and didn't indicate that he knew the other men, but Hayes allegedly told officers he knew Young from back in Tennessee, according to ABC 15. So a lot of contradictory information for police to sort through. But the criminal complaints, according to Arizona Central, indicate that police were also able to get their hands on travel information, including purchases for plane tickets for Hayes and Gray to fly out to Arizona. And it is believed that credit card information connects back to Young. Hayes reportedly told police he had business with another man out west, but wouldn't say who. Now, cell phone location evidence is likely going to be critical in this case as well. Why? Because according to court records, the plane tickets were connected back to a cell phone number, and police were able to track it, showing that the phone was following the path the Malibu took on the day that Mercedes died and was in the area where her body was found. You want to talk about another layer to this, Joseph? I mean, now the phone data is key and the travel records are key.
Boy, it is. And this is, I think, for you and I to have this discussion, I think this is the first time we've had a discussion where we've got a phone that's connected, say, to the purchase of a ticket like this, or the purchase of something. Oh, and by the way, the data that's coming off the phone is tracking the movement. Again, I guess I'm very reflective today, Jesse. I'm thinking about the young Mennonite woman. Do you remember her?
Sasha Krause.
Out of New Mexico. Remember, they were able to track those phones, both the perpetrator and Sasha's phone, simultaneously going down the road. That's the world that we live in. That's the world that these criminals live in now.
It's sloppy, right? Wouldn't you say this is sloppy?
Yeah, and the reality of this is a real cold cup of coffee for them, because they're going to have, it's very, very difficult. 2 things that are very difficult to explain away in the present world of crime science. and that is digital data and DNA. All right, now they've hit the digital data jackpot right here. It's going to be very hard to get past this. The only way they're going to be able to get past it is what you and I have seen over and over again, and that's where the defense may actually say, well, you know what, it's they collected it inappropriately or they processed it in the wrong way. The numbers just don't lie, Jesse. That's going to be a real tough mountain for them to climb.
So the Maricopa County, again, they're innocent until proven guilty, but when you're listening to this evidence, you also have to be thinking, oh my gosh. So the Maricopa County investigators, they also reportedly talked to a man whose cell phone location was near the scene of the burning car. And get this, he apparently tells authorities that Young called him to go, quote, pick up a package, which turned out to be two men, likely Hayes and Gray. So the court paperwork indicates that the man told detectives he was given the location as well as a car. He picked up two men, drove them back to the Phoenix area, and the man and Hayes' phones both show them on I-10 in the hours after Mercedes' death. And police were also able to confirm that the phone number connected to the plane ticket purchase was the same number that called this unidentified man around 2 a.m. Now, there's no word on whether the man who allegedly gave maybe Hayes and Gray a ride will face any kind of charges, but it's a significant development nonetheless. And authorities believe that Hayes and Gray took a Greyhound bus together back to Chattanooga, Tennessee, but now they're going to be back in Arizona, this time in jail and eventually a courtroom. Another snippet to this, Joseph, it seems like the more people you include, right, taking the allegations as true, the more people you include, yes, it might, help with the plot, but it makes another link. It's another breadcrumb.
Yeah, it is, and it seems. I'm glad you said this. I was thinking the same thing a second ago. It's like, in the immediate, it seems like, okay, I can get this crime or crimes pulled off if I have a group of people helping me. But for every person that you add to the equation, that becomes problematic for you down the road. And again, I don't want to step off into your area. The first thing I'm thinking about is if you get all of these individuals metaphorically in the same room together, somebody's going to break, somebody's going to roll over on the other person, and it's a house of cards. It folds pretty quickly. So you combine that with all of this forensic evidence that plays into this. One other thing that I'm quite fascinated by, and if I can just go back to the forensic evidence for 1 second, the fact that they found another fingerprint on the bottom of a plastic cup within the cabin of a burning car, that speaks a lot to me, at least. And again, we've discussed her injuries and also the results from the autopsy. It almost seems as though that this was a flash event, a flash fire. Well, how do you get a flash fire like this? Well, first off, commonly motor vehicles they don't burn very well. You wouldn't want to start a bonfire with a car, all right? It's just not very flammable. You have engines that blow up, they go out pretty quickly. But if you're talking about within the cabin of the car, let's say that the fire doesn't start in the engine block itself, what's going to be burning in there is generally going to be the seats, if they're fabric, and those are going to be burned. It's not going to be very sustainable, so that means you have to have accelerant in there. It's going to flash over. It flashes over so quickly that a plastic cup is not consumed and you can still recover a latent print off of it. To me, Jesse, I've got somewhere I'm going with this. To me, if you're in possession of an accelerant, okay, that's another big piece of the puzzle when you're trying to put together a case, when you're trying to prove intent. I don't know about you. I don't generally walk around with a gallon of gasoline in my hand, okay? Was it your intent, I think this is a question that has to be asked, to set the car on fire with her in it? And why would you want to do that? What were you trying to destroy? Were you trying to destroy their body, the body that might be in there? Were you trying to destroy some kind of peripheral evidence? And most of the time, in my experience, relative to these arson cases, most of these perpetrators believe if I just dump a cup of gas or even a gallon of gas on something, it's just going to be completely consumed. Nothing could be further from the truth. It's an accelerant. It's not a fuel. It burns off pretty quick. You'll get that big whoo sound like this. It'll burn for a few seconds, maybe a few minutes, and then it's gone. It's completely gone. And so the fact that you try to burn something up just merely with gasoline it's not going to work. And there's no telling what other kind of evidence they might have in this vehicle as well.
The medical examiner's findings revealed that Mercedes Vega's ultimate cause of death was severe burns and smoke inhalation, not the initial gunshot or other injuries she suffered. This critical detail indicates she was still alive when the fire was set, enduring the horrific blaze. In other words, Mercedes survived the initial attack only to perish in the ensuing fire, a fact that adds a chilling layer to the crime. The knowledge that she breathed in smoke and suffered burns before dying underscores the brutal and calculated nature of her killing, as it appears the perpetrators ensured she would not survive by igniting the vehicle with her trapped inside. This revelation has been devastating to her family and investigators alike, painting a harrowing picture of the final moments of her life. Investigators also uncovered a dangerous prior encounter between Mercedes and one of the suspects, Kajjo Young. In October 2020, Mercedes was the victim of an armed robbery in which Young allegedly held her at gunpoint and stole her belongings. She bravely identified him in a police lineup, leading to Young's arrest and charges for that crime. Importantly, Mercedes was scheduled to testify against Young in court regarding the robbery, a role that put her in a potentially perilous position. This connection suggests a powerful motive for murder. Prosecutors believe Mercedes may have been killed to silence her before she could testify. The fact that Mercedes was a witness against Young in the pending case casts him in an intensely suspicious light. It implies her murder was not a random act of violence, but possibly a premeditated effort to prevent her from delivering damning testimony. This development has shifted the focus of the investigation, as detectives consider that Mercedes' cooperation with authorities in 2020 might have directly led to her being targeted in 2023. A trove of digital and travel records further strengthened the case by connecting Young, Hayes, and a third suspect, Jared Gray, to a coordinated plot. Cell phone data gathered by investigators traced Hayes and Gray following the same route as Mercedes' car on the night of the murder, suggesting they were tailing or accompanying her vehicle. Additionally, travel records showed that Young himself arranged plane tickets for Sincere Hayes and Jared Gray to fly from Tennessee to Arizona just before the killing. This means all three men, Young, Hayes, and Gray, were placed in Arizona at the critical time, far from their Tennessee home base, in what appears to be a planned trip explicitly tied to the crime. The airline ticket purchases made with Young's credit card and the synchronized cell phone pings are damning evidence of conspiracy. They indicate the suspects moved in unison and had pre-existing plans to be in Arizona when Mercedes was abducted and killed. Such evidence of coordinated travel and communication has been crucial for detectives, as it weaves the three suspects together in a timeline that aligns with Mercedes' disappearance and death. It strongly bolsters the theory that the murder was a calculated team effort, rather than the act of a lone individual, and it provides a clearer picture of how the crime was organized across state lines. The investigation soon expanded beyond Arizona's borders as authorities pursued the suspects across state lines. Hayes and Gray had fled Arizona immediately after Vega's death, reportedly opting for a cross-country Greyhound bus to avoid detection. It took several months of coordinated effort with agencies in other states to track them down. Hayes ultimately surrendered to law enforcement in Chattanooga, Tennessee, in late 2024, nearly a year after the murder. Not long after, Gray was located and apprehended in Georgia, bringing both fugitives into custody to face charges back in Arizona. Both suspects were then extradited to Arizona, highlighting the extensive interstate collaboration required to bring them to justice. Back in Arizona, detectives painstakingly pieced together forensic and electronic evidence to strengthen the case against Hayes and Gray. Despite the perpetrator's attempt to obliterate proof by setting the car ablaze, investigators recovered a key piece of physical evidence, a charred drinking cup found inside the burned vehicle that bore Jared Gray's fingerprints on Star vehicle telemetry data placed the Malibu, the burned car, and Nenena's Vega's apartment garage on the day of the crime and showed both the Malibu and Vega's own car traveling to a nearby restaurant where Vega's car was later abandoned. Inside Vega's dumped car, crime lab analysts found DNA that matched Hayes, directly linking him to the scene. Furthermore, cell phone records from that night indicate that Hayes and Gray's devices moved along the exact same route as the Malibu, corroborating that the two men were acting in concert during the abduction and murder. Evidence of meticulous planning has led investigators to widen the scope of the case into a broader conspiracy. For example, the Chevrolet Malibu used to dispose of Vega's body was bought via an online marketplace before the murder, and two individuals later admitted that Young paid them to obtain this car, a step taken to facilitate the crime and cover its tracks. Investigators also discovered that Young orchestrated the suspect's travel arrangements, using his resources to fly Hayes and Gray from Tennessee to Arizona in advance of the killing. These coordinated actions suggest the crime was not a random act, but a calculated effort to eliminate Vega as a witness. In fact, prosecutors allege that Vega was targeted because she had identified Young in the 2020 armed robbery case, implying the murder was intended to prevent her from testifying. In light of these findings, authorities have filed additional charges and are pursuing multiple angles. Gray has now been formally accused of Vega's murder alongside related charges, and Young is charged with conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and kidnapping in connection with the case. Separately, Young faces a slate of felony counts from an unrelated narcotics investigation, which identifies him as the ringleader of a drug trafficking operation moving fentanyl and other narcotics from Arizona to major cities like New York and Atlanta. Officials note that Vega's murder is being treated as part of this larger organized crime picture. The legal process remains ongoing. Arizona prosecutors have signaled their intent to seek the death penalty against Hayes, and they caution that further arrests or charges could still emerge as more details of the plot come to light. For Mercedes Vega's family, the search for answers continues. The case is still developing, and investigators are working hard to find the truth. Each day, new details could emerge, giving hope that justice will be served. At Beyond the Headlines, we will keep watching this case and bring you any updates as new information comes to light. If you want to hear more stories like this and stay updated on this case, we invite you to follow or subscribe to Beyond the Headlines. By joining us, you will not miss any new information about Mercedes' case and will also hear about other important stories we share. Cool. Thank you for being a part of this story. We hope you will be with us next time as we continue to look beyond the headlines.